Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Murphy, and I'm a third year student pharmacist at the College of Pharmacy. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about pharmacy in Egypt. And we're going to start things off with a background on Egypt and then get into what the common population looks like within Egypt and what some of their most common disease states are in the country. And then we're going to look at some of the structure of the healthcare system and then get into the meat of our presentation on what being a pharmacist in Egypt is all about. So, starting things off, looking at a background on Egypt, I thought it would be important to take a look at where Egypt is located in the world. So, as you can see, this is pretty well-known information, but Egypt is located in the northeast corner of Africa. And that upper right-hand picture, you can see a image of a map of Egypt, and you can see in the right corner Cairo, the capital of Egypt. And that bottom image is that of the flag of Egypt. And actually, behind this flag, there's a great deal of symbolism, and I was actually pretty surprised to learn the story behind this flag. And each color and the eagle actually have a meaning. So the red section of the flag is actually meant to symbolize the oppressive nature of the British control within Egypt before 1952, when they were occupied by the British. And the white section of the flag is meant to symbolize the non-bloody revolution that took place in Egypt in 1952, leading to the black section, which is meant to depict the freedom of the Egyptian people from 1952 to the present. And the eagle in the center is meant to depict strength and power of the Egyptian people. So I think this is a great symbol and representation of the Egyptian people, and it gives a little bit of an interesting story into their history and where they've come from. So moving forward, I thought it'd be important to, show some of the iconic images that one might think of when they hear the word Egypt. And I know for me, the first images that come to mind are that of the pyramids and the Sphinx. And I hope someday to be able to see them. I've heard amazing stories that people have told about seeing these in person, and it's just breathtaking. So I hope that everyone at some chance in their lifetime gets to see these amazing pieces within Egypt. And because I'm incredibly passionate about food, I had to include a few pictures of the local cuisine within this presentation. And the picture up at the top is that of koshari, which is a local dish with a base of pasta and tomatoes and other vegetables and beans. The dish off to the right is that of full madams, and that is a lentil-based soup, and with a side of bread and vegetables, and much of these three ingredients actually make up most of the food within Egypt. It is made up primarily of beans or lentils, breads, and vegetables. And then the picture at the bottom is that of kanafa, which is a pastry dessert, and it's a thin pastry that is usually wrapped around itself many times and baked, and it's usually wrapped around a sweet cream or a mixture of nuts, and it looks really good. To me, I'm Greek, and it looks similar to baklava to me, so it looks amazing. But I also wanted to include in this first section a little bit of interesting history that I actually came upon. Now, this painting is from the artist Robert Tom, and it's from one of his series called Great Moments in Pharmacy. And actually, the one of the precursor companies to the company that we now know as Pfizer commissioned Mr. Tom to paint this series. And what he was tasked to do was to paint the history of pharmacy from ancient civilizations up to when he was painting them in the 1950s. And he picked this depiction of a precursor to pharmacy within the ancient Egyptian civilizations to depict in this painting called Days of Papyrus Ebers. And I just thought it was very interesting to see that this artist would pick this depiction of pharmacy to represent throughout the course of the history of pharmacy. And I've actually seen this painting in person. It's hanging up at the American Pharmacists Association headquarters in Washington, D.C. And if you get the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., make sure to stop by the APHA headquarters. It's amazing to see these paintings and the whole series in person. So moving forward and looking at the demographics of Egypt, I want to start with just a snapshot of the population. So the population consists of just under 95 million people, and it's the 16th largest country in the world. And this picture right here is that of Cairo, and it's just a beautiful landscape. Within the population, nearly 99.6% are Egyptian. And as I'm sure that you know, that's very different from what we are used to here at home, where it's a melting pot of different people and cultures. So within Egypt, nearly 100% of the people are all Egyptian. And within that population, nearly 90% are Sunni Muslim. And within the country, the official language is Arabic. Now, the common person within Egypt is relatively young. The median age of males is 23.5, and the median age of females is 24.1. And the overall life expectancy of both male and female is 72.7. And this compares to the United States, where we hang around our life expectancy right around the 80s. So very similar to the US, except for the fact that they're a relatively young country within their median age. And looking at their physicians and hospitals, you can see that there's 2.83 physicians per 1,000 population and 0.5 hospital beds per 1,000 population. And this compares to the US with the fact that the United States has 2.45 physicians per 1,000 people and 2.9 hospital beds per 1,000 people. And so you can see right there that within Egypt, they do have a few more physicians per 1,000 people, but the United States does have several more hospital beds per 1,000 people, but overall, relatively similar. And then within the Egyptian country, there are actually 13.75 pharmacists per 10,000 people. And then looking at some of their most common disease states within Egypt, you can see that the obesity rate is 27.7%, and that cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of mortality at 45%. So just looking in comparison to the United States, the obesity rate within the US is right around 35%. So, and cardiovascular disease is a leading cause of mortality within the US. So, if you're practicing in Egypt or you're practicing in the US, you're going to see relatively similar patients that might be living with the same types of chronic diseases. I thought that was pretty interesting when I was doing my research into this country. Now, moving forward and looking at the national structure of the healthcare system, you can see that just like in the US, there's a public healthcare system and a private healthcare system. The public healthcare system is overseen by the Ministry of Health and Population and the Health Insurance Organization. And then the private healthcare system, similar to the US, is made up of different corporations that fund healthcare through private insurance companies. Within the public healthcare system, nearly 45% of the population have the opportunity to use public healthcare. And the groups that are primarily within the use for public healthcare are that of the very young, the very old, and those that are government employees. Within the private sector, nearly 80% do not have access to public health care. And the idea in the country, when it was originally after the revolution in 1952, the country wanted to be able to provide public health care to all people. However, due to lacks of funds and just the enormous cost that it would be to provide public health care to all people within a newly free country, they weren't able to justify being able to provide public health care to all people. And that's where they picked several different groups, the young, the very old, and government employees that would be receiving public health care. However, in the past several years, there has been an increase in those utilizing public health care, which has gotten up to that 45% mentioned before. And at the same time, we see more individuals that are actually now paying out of pocket for their costs. So you kind of see from different sources divergent statistics of more people moving towards public health care and more people moving towards out-of-pocket payment for their healthcare services. So no matter what in the future, it'll be interesting to see what happens within Egypt if they remain with this balance of private and public healthcare, or if they move more towards only having public or private. No matter what, it'll be interesting to see. Now, moving forward and looking at really what I'm the most interested in, which is being a pharmacist in Egypt, we're going to start with really chronologically what it looks like to, start off being a pharmacist, and then we'll talk a little bit about being a practitioner, being a practicing pharmacist within Egypt, and then maybe where I think that they're moving in the future. So this is a picture of one of the colleges of pharmacy within Egypt. This is Ain Shams University College of Pharmacy. And you can see up in the right-hand corner of this slide that in 2006 there were 6 public and 6 private schools. And so in 2006 there were 12 schools, and just to put a little bit of a historical perspective on this, the first pharmacy program in Egypt actually opened in 1824 in Cairo, Egypt. So if you know any history about the opening of the College of Pharmacy at Ohio State, we opened, I believe, in 1875. So you can see that there was several years before us, there was already a pharmacy program open in Cairo, Egypt. But over the course of that century, those 2 centuries, really only 11 other schools opened, 6 public and 6 private schools. And in 2006, they were graduating just over 22,000 new practicing pharmacists per year. Now, in reports that I found in 2017, I found two different numbers. I found some that were saying that there were 26 schools and some saying that there were 31 schools within Egypt. Regardless, you can see that over the past 10 years, there's been a huge jump in the number of schools that are within Egypt. And if we look at what the common student looks like, similar to the US, there are 2 to 3 females per male in the class. And then in 2003, there were 11,000 to 13,000 that were admitted. And just looking at those numbers in 2003 compared to the number of graduates in 2006, and then compared to the number of schools that are in 2017, you can see that these numbers are increasing drastically. And this is a similar result that I've seen actually within the United States, that over the past 20 years or so, there's been a drastic increase in the number of those applying to pharmacy school and in the number of pharmacy schools. So it's very similar that within the US and within Egypt, we're dealing with similar things at similar times in our history. And within the curriculum of Egyptian pharmacy schools, you can see that prior, they really focused on the traditional practice of pharmacy, maybe within a community practice setting. But over the past several years, there's been an increasing clinical focus within the pharmacy schools. And once we start talking about the practice of pharmacy within Egypt, you'll see that increasing clinical focus doesn't end at being a student pharmacist. It is going out and making a difference in their communities. Now, similar to the US, the most common practice setting for a pharmacist in Egypt is in the community. There are practicing pharmacists within the clinical or hospitals or health system setting, but it doesn't compare to the number of pharmacists that are practicing in the community setting. In 2011, you can see that there were just shy of 140,000 practicing pharmacists in Egypt. And this picture right here depicts a common representation of what a pharmacy in Egypt might look like. And the first thing that jumps out to me when I see this picture, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one here that thinks this, that there isn't much of a storefront, similar to how the US community pharmacies work, maybe at a Walgreens or CVS. And I've seen pharmacies like this through personal travels of my own, traveling to pharmacies in other countries, where the pharmacies really focus on the medications. And even if they do have a storefront, what they are selling tends to generally relate to health in some way. Maybe it's an herbal or dietary supplement, or maybe it's some sort of moisturizer. But overall, the things being sold in the pharmacy somehow relate to one's health. And I thought this was very interesting, that this general representation of what a pharmacy looks like in Egypt is that of focusing all-encompassing on health, without the normal storefront that you might find in the United States. So this is a little bit of a look at a statistic that I've found, and maybe of a prediction of the future of pharmacy within Egypt. So BPS, or the Board of Pharmacy Specialties, this is a company within the United States that certifies the pharmacy specialists within the US and across the world. And BPS is actually an autonomous division of the American Pharmacists Association, or APHA. And what they do is, I'm sure that many of you have heard of them before, but the board certified pharmacotherapy specialist or board certified oncology specialist. Those are what BPS tests and certifies the pharmacy specialists. And up until recently, only the United States had BPS certified pharmacists. But in the past decade or so, there's been a drastic increase in the amount of pharmacists setting for these exams in other countries. And I found an article that was actually pretty interesting, and it explained that the US has the most number of BPS Board of Pharmacy Specialist pharmacists, but Egypt has the second highest number of pharmacy specialists across the entire world. And I thought this was very interesting because as I found information that their student pharmacists are having an increasing clinical curriculum, you can see that once they get out into practice, they are going and setting for furthering credentials, and those numbers are really proving that the practice of pharmacy within Egypt is moving towards that more clinical role. Now, I did find one reference that explained that clinical pharmacy in Egypt is still in its, and I thought this was an interesting way of saying this, still in its embryonic stage. But you can see with this document that they're moving towards clinical pharmacy in the future. And many of the individuals within that are practicing pharmacy in Egypt are already board certified and are already practicing that clinical pharmacy. So I wanted to finish up the presentation here with looking at some of the pharmacy organizations that individuals within Egypt take part in. Because being a pharmacist isn't just about practicing pharmacy, it's about being a part of a community within your profession. And just like pharmacists are parts of their community through their various national, state, and local pharmacy organizations, Egyptians are exactly the same. And some of the most popular pharmacy organizations within Egypt are the Egyptian Pharmacists Association, up in that left-hand corner, and the Egyptian Pharmaceutical Students Federation, which is a section of the International Pharmaceutical Students Federation, or IPSF. And I found this interesting. The Egyptian Pharmaceutical Students Federation actually has over 85,000 members, and this is made up of student pharmacists within the country and pharmacists that are within their first 7 years of graduating. So you can see that being a part of a pharmacy organization is very important within Egypt. And I also had to include a flyer from a regional international conference that recently happened in 2016 in Cairo. So this is just a little bit of a picture of what it's like to not only be a pharmacist in Egypt, but where the pharmacist might be going in the future, and what it's like to be a part of that community of pharmacists and being a part of a greater profession within the country. So I'm going to finish up here with my references and with my main slide, and I just want to say thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present a little bit of information about what pharmacy is like in Egypt. I hope that we were able to learn a little bit about this amazing country together, and I'm looking forward to the discussions in the next week. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.